How's it going, everybody? This is Dailies to Downloads. My name is Chad. With me is Erik.
Right.
How you doing this week, Erik?
I'm doing all right. A couple more weeks of winter, I guess, because of the groundhog.
Oh God.
How does that work? The groundhog season's shadow. We get 2 Christmases, or what is? How does this go? What's supposed to happen?
He saw his shadow, so that meant 6 more weeks of winter. And if he doesn't, then I guess that means spring is right around the corner. And I know that my wife showed my daughters that, and at least one of my daughters, I crushed that for her, and I was like, it's the same either way. Like,
I mean,
that's what.
it didn't make sense to me as a kid either. I'm like, couldn't they couldn't they show the groundhog a calendar? I mean, it says March 21st. It's like this groundhog is stupid. It's like I never understood it.
It's a big thing in PA, though.
And that's what I didn't know. Punxsutawney was a real place, and the
Oh,
whole
yeah.
thing. So I educated myself.
But this show is not about Punxsutawney Phil, or the movie Groundhog Day.
But one day we'll do it.
Yeah, one day we'll get there. We're doing another movie challenge this week, and this time Erik challenged me to watch Malcolm and Marie. So that is the movie we're going to be talking about today. And Malcolm and Marie was written and directed by Sam Levinson, son of well-known filmmaker Barry Levinson. And the runtime is an hour and 46 minutes. It is rated R. It's in black and white, and it was released in theaters shortly before on Netflix. It was released on Netflix February 5th, 2021. I couldn't find any box office information. From what I heard, it made next to nothing at the box office, which is not surprising given the time period we're in.
Yeah.
But the synopsis, which is from IMDb, a filmmaker returns home with his girlfriend following a celebratory movie premiere as he waits what's sure to be imminent critical and financial success. The evening suddenly takes a turn as revelations about their relationship begin to surface, testing the strength of their love. So, how was that plot synopsis, Erik? Was that a good one?
I think that is the movie.
Nobody needs to see it now. That's just...
I mean, if that it's weird. It's a great representation of the movie, but it also doesn't tell you why you might like it or dislike it, because I think that comes probably from the very specific way that the story is told.
Right.
The reason I recommended watching this one, it was a first time watch for myself as well. So I mean, recommending it as us both watching it for the first time was because, not surprisingly, there was a lot of it became like a lot of anger and vitriol towards this movie, and I think a lot of that is because the movie's somewhat asking to it's almost daring the people who write about movies to dislike it.
Right.
In a weird, there's a real anger and almost of combative, defensive tone to the movie, and so they come back from this premiere, and John David Washington is this filmmaker who we are led to believe it was a very, it says in the log line, successful premiere. I mean, who knows? I also didn't know, like, how is he delusional or not? Like is this movie, is he actually like hot shit and he is going to be this next big filmmaker? And then they're just kind of arguing over the inspiration for the movie. He wrote it as well, and it is about a young girl who at 20 was a drug addict and overdosed, and then she tried to commit suicide and then turned her life around, blah blah, which is essentially the real story of his girlfriend, played by Zendaya in the movie.
Right.
And so what confused me a little bit for a little while is that it seemed like this premiere, we don't see the premiere, they only talk about it. The whole movie is pretty much in this house. I also should mention, it's the first film I've seen that was actually shot during the pandemic.
Right.
So that's also a part of the experiment, I think, because it's only 2 actors and it is pretty much in a closed environment, and when they go outside, it's just like right behind this house.
Right.
So it was all COVID protocols and
Yeah,
all that kind of
they
stuff.
followed it to the T from what I read anyway. They quarantined before and after. There was no more than 12 people allowed on set, and it was filmed in California. And
Yeah, in Carmel, California, where Clint Eastwood was the mayor for one term in
right,
1986 to 1988. He was the mayor of Carmel. I think a lot of celebrities live out there. But yeah, I looked that up after, and but
and
yeah,
they got approval from all the guilds
yeah.
to do it as well. That was
And I think it was pretty much because Sam Levinson and Zendaya worked on the HBO series Euphoria,
right. Yeah,
and like all the crew, I think, is also from Euphoria. So they brought them on. I think they would have been shooting season 2 of Euphoria had it not been for the pandemic,
right.
and so they decided to. Sam Levinson decided to write something for these for her, and then he's good friends. This is another reason why I recommend this movie because um, one thing that I think has stood out for people's somewhat anger, which has been the just the nepotism that's on display on a couple of different levels. Sam Levinson, like you mentioned, is the son of Barry Levinson, and he's good friends with the one of the producers who is. Not the producer that's his wife, Ashley Levinson, but one of the producers who is Denzel Washington's daughter, John David Washington's sister. And so that's how he got John David Washington involved, and then he wrote this obviously very rapidly, and they shot it, and so I think that there are these different plays on that, and I think the other anger is coming from this weird critical roasting that feels very uh, personal,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
feels very and I mean, there's nothing wrong with that, but it doesn't it doesn't let it go. It just
Well, yeah,
it holds on to it, and like after a while, like it was becoming a little weird. And the other big thing is that um a lot. This is we mentioned the cast of black cast and written by Sam Levinson, is a very white gentleman, and writing characters that are mention a lot of things about how critics of Caucasian critics will perceive the movie and write about the movie and the different social dynamics that are involved when a white critic writes about a black filmmaker and their work and things like that. Knowing that it's all coming from Sam Levinson and where's the line between blah blah blah, I think has caused some honestly not confusion, but it just seems like some of the intentions seem a little bit. They're definitely bitter. I mean, they're definitely bitter, and but yeah, I guess as a starting off talking point,
no,
that
absolutely. And I should add, not that this is related to my opinion, there was, I guess, a little controversy as well about the the age difference between John David Washington, who's 35, and Zendaya, who is 23. And my reaction to that is people need to get a life. Like,
yeah,
and
yeah, I mean,
these
yeah,
are actors playing characters. We don't know how old the characters are. So
yeah.
it's just these are, and but last I checked, they're both that their ages both make them consenting adults. So
Yeah.
it's like,
And that's actually not a big age gap for Hollywood, you know. I mean, if anything,
well,
yeah.
yeah.
But
So
she does. Zendaya does look. It's actually. I mean, it is pretty incredible after she when they come back from the premiere and makeup on, and then that all goes away in the second half, and then she does look very young.
yes,
And
I
even
agree.
the way the movie frames her is. But then they're also anyway. I don't want to jump ahead.
Yeah, yeah. So yeah, let's get into it. So my opinion is, like, first of all, A+ performances
Yeah.
from John David Washington and Zendaya. They are both really great to watch, and I think as a couple, I thought they had really good chemistry. When the script focuses on their relationship, I thought it was very good and engaging to watch. When it drifts into the diatribes on critics, or understanding the point of films, or actors giving their opinions, or etc. and so forth, I at times I was taken out of the moment because, and I think you and I might have talked about this with other movies in the past. It felt less like the characters speaking and more like the director speaking to us. And that at that point I had an issue with it. And so and not because I have a kinship to critics, even though I used to review movies for a lowly site. But it was just, to me, it kind of, it when it started, I was like, okay, is this what we're gonna, it's gonna be like? And then it drifts into the relationship, but then he comes back to the critics in like a really big way. Like there's a really huge rant that he does, and it was like okay, like why are we getting back into this? And this is a guy that's supposedly, his movie is being acclaimed, and
Yeah,
he's like
it's
going
right
on this.
after he gets like a good review,
Right, and
and
he's
he
like this
leaves.
aggressive, like screaming fit, and it was those moments, kind of took me out of it a little bit. But um, I think I would, a lot of people, and I would agree with, the as a director, Sam Levinson's camera work I thought was good. It was very, to quote some other critics, very fluid shots, neat angles, and it's a very eye-catching house, which we talked a little bit about that when we were talking about The Invisible Man in the
Yeah,
past.
yeah,
Like
it's got that feel.
these houses with a lot of windows offer like some really interesting viewpoints, I think, and
Yeah,
ways for the director to put the camera.
it almost feels like a horror movie. It's just an isolated house in the middle of nowhere.
Yeah,
Luckily, they throw in a line about "You're lucky the production team gave us this place." Like, there's a line that they're staying there as I guess that they live somewhere else, but this house that they're staying in, I guess they've been put up in due to the premiere or whatever. There's a throwaway line that's not
yeah.
great, but
And what's funny is that I had wondered that before he said it.
yeah,
I was like, wow, that's a big house for a guy that's like, and then he mentioned that line. And then later when he was yelling, I thought to myself, man, he must not be next to anybody, because like if I were to go outside right now and yell in my neighborhood, like people would be calling the police.
They're like, oh, he's ranting about Ida Lupino and Barry Jenkins again. Oh, we gotta call it like yeah. That's
And also as a side note, I really hope that if more people see this movie, I hope that William Wyler's name trends on Twitter or something, which would be, I think would be
yeah.
hilarious.
They're gonna have the best years of our lives and Roman Holiday as the number one rental queued movies going forward.
But to kind of wrap up my thoughts here, as a writer, though, Sam Levinson, it's obvious he knows how to pen fiery dialogue, but I think it lacks control and focus at times, and that is ultimately it is troubling about the movie, because there's really some really good moments in this, and I'll try not to go into too much detail to spoil it for people who haven't seen it, but there's a moment specifically where Zendaya's character is essentially there's a scene where she has a knife. We'll just put it at that. And I even like I was really it was really well done. I liked, like, there were certain moments in this that I really liked a lot. And there's another moment, and I swear this is going to be a line that I quote probably in fights with my own wife at some point. There's a moment where he's talking about past relationships,
Yeah,
and like there's a moment where John David Washington says, get the entire fuck out of here. Like,
yeah.
I don't know why. I don't know why that was funny.
I'd say there's some racy lines in that monologue
I
there.
just thought that
What
was
line are
funny.
you thinking? Yeah.
So yeah, this movie reminded me a little bit of Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf, but that movie had a point to what was going on, and this movie values more style over substance. But before I wrap up anything there, I'll throw it to you. So, what did you think overall?
Yeah. I mean, I echo a lot of your sentiments, and I do inherently like these kind of to mention like Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf. I guess is sort of the grand example of this genre, and that was based on a play, and this could easily be one as well.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
And and I do like these kind of almost like taking place in real time over 2 hours, a little less than 2 hours. because I was wondering, like the usual things, like what time is it's late at night and they come back from a party, so I'm like, okay, it's gonna end with the sun rising. Are they gonna, like, where are we kind of going?
Right.
And I think but those elements aren't really committed to that much, because one of the things about Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf is that secrets and old resentments are revealed the more people drink. And
Right.
I mean, they have John David Washington drinking quite a lot, but um, uh,
I
it
would
does.
have passed out.
No, he seems very angry and loud and expressive from the beginning, and he doesn't really change that much through the course of the movie. And we'll see him. We'll taking some shots of stuff, which I guess is supposed to imply that it's going to get progressively more, combative. But he doesn't really change too much, and
And he's very articulate. Like,
I mean, the guy's like a human letterbox. I mean, the guy's
his rant. If I had had as much vodka, I'm just guessing it's vodka, but if I had had as much alcohol as he had, like, my rant that he did there about critics would have sounded a little bit differently.
And it was almost too flawless. Like, he doesn't like mess up a line. John David Washington doesn't mess up a line, and like it almost feels like it is so. The one thing I don't like about that felt very artificial was that they feel like individual scenes that, like, for like scene study class, right? They're like,
Yeah.
you there's a 10-minute confrontation, and then they like go into their respective corners, and we'll get a music cue, and then they're lovey-dovey again, and then someone walks away for a second, and then they come back, and it's World War III again.
Yeah.
And it keeps like resetting over and over and over again. And I bring up the alcohol stuff too, because you think he keeps drinking, he's not passing out, and it's almost, you think, building to them like making love at some point, or several times.
We're just waiting for it.
Just
like,
waiting, and then like every time.
It's like giving the audience collective blue balls.
They keep pulling back. They keep pulling back. And to me, it comes very much out of left field. Like, to me, they didn't seem like a couple that would ever have anything in common, or really, be very relatable. Like, it comes to a point where she has a lot of cigarettes. She smokes a lot, and she'll go out on the patio, and then she disappears, and then that leads to another gigantic argument after they just had a really, which I thought was actually a pretty good scene, where it feels improv. I'm sure it wasn't, where they're kind of just joking a lot about how the one time I thought it worked with how white critics will interpret a black filmmaker's work and try to add a political component to it, even if it's not there, just because they feel like they have to. And they're like, well, what if you made a Lego movie? How are you gonna, and I thought that was actually pretty funny. That was one of the only times where I felt like it kind of worked, that critique. I thought it was genuinely funny. But then, boom, there's just another gigantic anger storm. And then when it looks like they are going to finally make love on the floor, he's like, hold on, I have to use the bathroom. And I'm like, okay. And then he comes back, and then it's, why didn't you cast me in the film? As her, and I'm like, oh, here we go again. So it felt very much like written in like these 10-minute blocks to me. And I think also making the whole movie take place in one night almost works to its disadvantage, I think, just because as soon as they get home, she's like, I want to go to bed. There's this whole thing with mac and cheese.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that. Just as a side note, the way he eats mac and cheese, and I've mentioned The Sopranos a lot on this show, but it's fresh in my mind. He eats mac and cheese the way Tony Soprano eats pasta, in that he's like really jabbing it as hard as he can.
Yeah. He's got those.
I don't know why I thought of that, but anybody who's watched both will know what I'm talking about.
Yeah, no, but I think he like rolls up the sleeves, and it's almost like caveman kind of, and he kind of reminded me of his. Sometimes I can hear his father in the voice.
Oh yeah.
And like I'm sure he's conscious of that, so he's definitely a different kind of actor than his father, but there are certain moments where it's like, oh wow, okay, you can really see it. But yeah, so that was my biggest complaint, is that it felt more like, and some of these individual monologues are good, but they feel like it's for like an audition. Right. If you go on an audition, take a monologue from this movie that Zendaya gives, whatever, and I think that'd be really solid.
Yeah, it's
I
certainly an
don't think it
actor
really.
showcase in that way. Yeah.
Yeah. I just don't think together. I was like, okay, right from the start, she wants to go to bed and she doesn't want to get into something. She doesn't want to get into a big argument. Obviously, we have a 100-minute movie. We know that it's going to be big arguments, but how do we keep them together and how do we keep this movie going? And it doesn't really.
It reminded me a lot of a couple, those moments. Like in that, like you were talking about, she wanted to go to bed, and like he can tell that something's wrong, and he keeps poking and prodding, like, what, tell me what's wrong. Like I've done that. So like,
Sure.
like little moments like that, and I had to laugh the moment right before she talks about not being cast in the movie. Like you really think that's the moment that they're gonna finally like do the deed. Like,
Yeah.
but then he has to go to the bathroom, and in my head, I'm saying, "Oh man, don't do that." Like,
Because as soon as you come back out, it's going to lead, and of course it does, right?
don't leave her in her thoughts.
Yeah.
No.
And that kind of confused me as well with the because it starts with her being upset, or so we think, her being upset because he didn't thank her like in his introduction or a Q&A after the screening. He thanked like so many other people, but not his girlfriend.
Right.
Which apparently Sam Levinson did forgot to thank his wife at the premiere of Assassination Nation
Oh,
at Sundance like 3 years ago. But if you saw that movie, his wife got off lucky. I wouldn't want to be my name associated with it either. So don't thank me. Don't worry about it. Just keep it to yourself. But so and then it turns out that she's really upset because he took her life and used it as art, right? But then what confused me is that like so they've never spoken about what this movie is until the premiere, and this is just boom hits her all at once. I'm like, they're a couple. She didn't know what the movie is or what it's about. But then they throw in this thing about she auditioned, and I'm like, well, now I'm really confused. So like she just never brought it up over months and months.
it's
That
like maybe. I mean, I guess it's possible that it was like some of it was festering
I guess so. I guess it
a
all
bit
came
there,
to
but
a
yeah,
point.
no, you're right. Like, has this not come up before? Like, at what point? I mean, I'm sure, like, surely she was on set some days, right?
Yeah, it seemed like it was all a huge surprise to her. It hit her like a
Right.
ton of bricks, and that's what led to this gigantic moment. I guess what it was is that everyone is praising him as a genius,
Right.
and that he comes from wealth. But to Hollywood, if they see a black director, they think it's a poverty tale, and they kind of go into that aspect of it. Which, yeah, I mean, I do think there's some warranted stuff in there,
Right.
but it gets muddled in all this other stuff. And you, I mean, as we all know, to the now retired Kenneth Turan and Justin Tang, there is no white lady at the LA Times reviewing movies. But uh,
Right. And you
yeah,
know what? It's funny. I looked at that when I was looking at reviews of this, and
oh, IndieWire picked out. They're like, yeah, we're mentioned in this. Yeah, we're ready.
well, so let's talk about that for a second. I want to get
Yeah.
your opinion because this is certainly not the first movie to take aim at critics or loosely or directly or
Mhm.
casually. Um, I feel like most of the time that when movies talk about critics, I don't feel like critics are quick to then immediately like shit all over it. I feel like
Right.
they do know how to take it in stride and recognize the creativity or recognize the fact that what the filmmaker's trying to convey without
Yeah.
taking it personally.
If they're
You know,
hitting you below the belt, you don't go as low as they do.
but in this one, you were saying earlier that he's almost daring them not to like it. It is very combative. You used a good word, um, because I mean, I do get that feeling. Like he's like going to keep poking the bear to the point where they have no choice but to.
Yeah, and it gets so specific where I think that works against him. I assume that he thought the more specific he was in the writing, the I don't know, the more pointed or whatever. But to me, then it becomes more about his own personal vendettas,
Right.
and then you start questioning the nepotism and who he is, and then that does kind of play a factor into like, okay, like who is blah blah blah, and he's like, well, Do the Right Thing came out when political films, whatever, and I'm like, okay, that's your personal opinion about how that movie was received at the time. Right? Like, there
Right.
these things that are kind of thrown in there. I do think like the directors, if they choose to read their own reviews, which I'm sure a lot do, I'm sure there are huge pet peeves about people using adjectives and writing. I mean, there is something funny where it's like and then with this tracking shot, it's like it's a fucking dolly shot. Those kind of things, and then they go to longer lenses. Like we use the same lens for the whole movie. What do you tell like picking apart that stuff in a review where a lot of critics are still are not on the technical side, and then are going more story thematic elements in their writing. So I could see how it could be a pet peeve of the actual filmmaker reading those things, to hate read those things.
I would love to hear from some filmmakers see what they, because I'm sure some of them read reviews and I'm sure others don't and don't care.
Yeah.
It's hard for me to say which side of that I'd be on if I were a filmmaker myself, but I'd be interested to see, like, if they have a positive review, like if a Tarantino, certainly he reads them. Like if Tarantino has a positive review, does he pick it apart that way?
Yeah, and I think that's and they make it seem, again, it just seems a little unclear. Like they make it seem like this is like a make or break night for him, but then we find out that he's like um like has another project, a biopic that he's been that he's working on. So like he seems kind of set for life in a way. Like it definitely seems like this has been a huge success for him. And then he seems like the critics, I guess he was hanging out with the critics after. I don't know if the critics would normally be at this after party. That also feels a little not in good form on the critical behalf. A movie shot in quarantine that had limited, if not limited resources, then limited things that could do given the guidelines. I think it was interesting, and I do think that there are individual moments, like you mentioned, the knife moment,
Right.
and that I will remember and that'll stick with me. And I thought Zendaya is also very good, and I wish there was more of this, like where they stop talking just for like
Yeah.
like when she's in the bathtub and he has his long monologue, and like we see her face and like she's almost on the verge of tears, and then eventually she is. Like I thought sometimes that was more interesting than this constant barrage of a rant.
Absolutely. You need to know
And
when
I'm
to
like,
pull back a little bit.
yeah, I'm like, I just wish we could have more of that. It's black and white, 35 millimeter film. These are not things that come cheap, and and it's rare now to have that. So I wish it could have like been pulled back, been maybe a little quieter, maybe cut out one fight or combine two fights,
Right.
along the way.
No, absolutely. Yeah, I would. Yeah, I agree with that for sure. On a side note, I forgot to mention the budget for this was 2.5 million, and it sold to Netflix for 30. So, they
Yeah, yeah.
that was back in September of 2020.
I now want to see a movie about Sam Levinson reading the reviews from Malcolm and Marie. And then we'll see how that movie goes, and then we'll just keep on going, and we'll keep going down the rabbit hole over and over again.
I would love to get some thoughts from whoever his spouse is.
Yeah. It's yeah. I mean, it's an interesting project. I do like these kind of movies. It almost it's I almost thought it's like a Before Sunrise, but you don't necessarily want to spend too much time with these characters. Like you're kind of okay with departing for 9 years until we meet again. It's like, all right, this has been a freaking whirlwind of a night.
Now I want to see these two couples get together.
Oh yeah, Malcolm and Marie and Jesse and Celine. Yeah, I think they would. I don't know if it would go that great. But yeah, it's like a night from hell. But I do admire the commitment, I guess. And yeah, it is a beautiful house. whose house
It
that
is, yeah.
it is beautiful.
So at the end of the day, Eric, thumbs up, thumbs down.
It's got to be one or the other. We're not gonna do it. Yeah. I'll say thumbs up in that if this at all piqued your interest, or if a part of it piqued your interest, the description, you should check it out. But it's for the specific audience that it's made for. I don't know if they would like it.
Right.
If that makes sense. If that makes sense.
Well,
Um,
it's funny. I think you and I are in agreement here. You wanted to go thumbs in the middle, and
yeah, just because when you break it down, I'm like, yeah, enough of this movie kind of annoyed me, and I do think it's kind of flawed in a lot of its things, but it's an interesting experience, I guess,
yeah,
if you will.
yeah,
Uh,
we're both on the fence in that regard, and I was toying with thumbs down or thumbs marginal thumbs up. So yeah, I could certainly go thumbs kind of barely up, in
yeah,
this regard, like because I did enjoy the acting, and it is a thought-provoking movie in that it talks about different issues and that it covers different topics that would get people talking afterwards.
yeah,
So
absolutely.
for that reason, and the fact that it's on Netflix, if if you don't have a subscription yourself, I'm sure you're mooching off somebody. So
Yeah,
I mean,
hey,
it's not going to cost you anything. So
watch it back to back with Marriage Story on Netflix, maybe. Um, and
and then see if you're still with your significant other.
exactly, like if you don't address these problems early in the relationship, like Malcolm and Marie, then you watch Marriage Story, you say, okay, this is what happens if we get married, and then you can just spend the whole your whole day watching these Netflix sad relationship films.
Yeah, after Marriage Story, then go back and watch Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf, and
Yes,
by
in
that
Marriage,
point, if you're not ready to, have a
be
knockdown
celibate,
drag out,
celibate and single in a cave for the rest of your life. You never want to interact with anyone ever again. Even though John David Washington's character's backstory, he seems to have had a pretty lively nightlife.
that's yeah, yeah.
So
He was rattling off a lot of names there, and
I'm telling you, I mean, that is something that I don't think the young kids know. That sometimes you can just be as hot and steamy in your descriptive words.
that's
It's just as powerful as the image sometimes. Just
absolutely.
descriptive dialogue.
Well, if you see this movie, let us know what you think. If you take the side of critics, let us know. If you're if have,
Yeah, and if
if
you
you
didn't
want to
like it,
provide
that's
your
because
own
you didn't get
rant
it.
about
Yeah,
critics, please do.
yeah. I just wish there would have been a line about him going on Letterboxd and looking up his own movie to see who's rated it. He's like, goddamn, 2.5 stars from DJ Kooky. God damn it, who is this guy? This is like a random guy.
If Letterboxd is ever mentioned in a movie, it would be the best day of their life for sure.
Oh, it'll happen. If it hasn't happened already, it'll happen. Like that's what I'm sorry. I just thought now, like he does, I think, mention Twitter at one point very quickly, but that's something I could see filmmakers doing too, tracking like on social media. If anyone posts anything about their movie, that would drive me
Yeah, I
crazy.
mean, if you're looking at reviews on something like Letterboxd, or if you're looking at Twitter comments, then in my opinion, you really should reevaluate your levels of anxiety and
Oh yeah,
and worrying, because if you're going that deep to find comments, then you're just looking for people to get mad at, and to me, I don't see the point. I mean, if it's like a critic that you might run into, like is the case in this movie,
yeah,
that to an extent I get. You see this person at social gatherings, so you have an opinion about them as a person, but yeah.
yeah. It just I mean, is there the one moment in the film where someone actually does look at their phone? Because I'm like, why aren't they checking for reviews, whatever, as they're coming out on their phone? They say like Wi-Fi. There is a very funny bit I thought about when the paywall that comes up on these LA Times.
Yeah,
After you read 3 articles, whatever, you got to get the paywall, and he's like trying to find his wallet so he can pay the $1.99 for the month subscription so he can read the review. Sometimes those specific things I thought worked, but
yeah.
mostly not. But things like that, I'm like, okay, wow, what a particular joke that is. That
Yeah, it is.
speaks to a very specific audience, but
Like
it's
stuff
pretty
like
funny.
that had to have been experienced.
Oh yeah, oh
You
yeah,
know.
yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Yeah.
Well, for Eric, I am Chad. Thank you very much, and we will see you next week.